Hi everyone, Gingerbeard Mark here. The podcast is supposed to be on hiatus at the minute while I make a film about the Iceman. But the rule was if I got offered anyone really, really cool, I would take it. I would say yes, and the podcast would come out of hiatus. So here we are. Today's guest, Henry Normal, poet, writer, producer. I mean, he produced The Mighty Boosh, Nighty Night, Gavin and Stacey, Marion and Jeff, Human Remains, loads of Partridge. And now he's a poet touring around the country with Brian Bilston and Nigel Planer. So we talk about all that. We talk about I get a few stories about different TV shows from him. It was a great half hour, and he says at the end, and it's totally true, we could have talked for hours more, and we're definitely going to. I'm going to make that happen. He said, contact him in a year and we'll do it again. So don't worry, we will. We'll get really geeky with it in a year or so. So without further ado, this week's guest, I don't know why I say this week's, we haven't put a podcast out since November. Today's guest, the brilliant Henry Normal. How are you, Henry?
I'm a bit cold, to be honest with you. I've got my cardigan tucked in my underpants at the minute till next month, I think. It's a bit it's a bit cold, a bit nippy. That's why we're doing these gigs around the country. Get a lot of people together, a lot of body heat,
Yeah.
and save us some money, basically. But with lots of cuddles in the show. I think that's the idea.
Just going around leeching people's heat.
Exactly. Well, you give a little, you get a little. You know what I'm saying? Cuddles work both ways.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about the tour that you're doing with Brian, but I hope you don't mind if we chat about some of your TV stuff first.
That's fine. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. My years in the wilderness, as I like to call them.
Like you co-founded Baby Cow with Steve Coogan, and you're responsible for so much of my favorite comedy.
Oh, well, that's nice to hear. Yeah, yeah. I did 17 and a half years. So we started together, and then I retired about 6 years ago. But we'd made, I think, about 450 television programs and a dozen films. So what's your favourites?
Nighty Night, I
Oh, yeah.
absolutely adore Nighty Night. Obviously, lots of the Partridge stuff. I'm a big Partridge fan. I really like, and I've heard you say that you're not so keen on it, but I had it on VHS. I really like the Parole Officer. I know that's not
Do you
Baby
know,
Cow, but
I'm glad you like it. You see, the thing is, that was one entire summer of mine gone. We did 12 drafts, and I'm sure draft four was the best. But we kept going on until we got it wrong, basically. I mean, it's a decent enough film. It's a bit of a laugh. The old idea of it's supposed to be that it's about individuals that become a family. And although it's there, it's sort of the subtext is buried a little bit, I think.
yeah, yeah. I don't, yeah. Like I say, I think it was because it was part of my small VHS collection.
Yeah.
So it's always been like I've always been very fond of it.
Yeah, they were thinking of doing an American version at one stage. I think Adam Sandler had his eye on it at one stage, so it could have been. You never know. It might
Yeah,
still be re-released.
yeah. Could still pay the heating
Yeah,
bill a little bit.
Schwarzenegger or somebody like that in the league.
It's like Steve can do a really good Arnold Schwarzenegger
He
impression.
can,
I
but I'm
wonder
not
if
sure
it.
Arnold Schwarzenegger can do a good Steve. I've not seen it.
So like we'll talk about Night Tonight. I did. when did Julia come to you with the idea for that? Because obviously you'd worked with her on Human Remains and stuff
Yeah,
before.
no. What happened was that when Steve and I were doing the parole officer, we were working in Brighton, and Steve had a house in Brighton, and I got a house in Brighton and family. So we said, well, let's form a company, and then we can work in Brighton rather than having to go to Manchester or to London. So we formed Baby Cow, and Steve was very adamant that he didn't want to be in the first program. We wanted to, to show that it wasn't just a company for Steve's work. So we asked Julia Davis. She was the first person we rang because she toured with Steve on his tour, The Man Who Thinks He's It, which was Steve was the star, and then you got Julia Davis and Simon Pegg. Whatever happened, he's gone on to be world famous, hasn't he? Mission Impossible, Star Trek, all manner of stuff. So yeah, maybe we should have given Simon Pegg a ring now. But we give Julia a ring, and she said, oh, she was working on something with Rob Brydon, and we'd not heard of Rob Brydon, but he seemed a nice enough lad, and he came round, and we said, yeah, let's do Human Remains, and which was a set of 6 half hours with them playing different characters. But Rob had also got this other thing he'd been working on, a 10-minute long, called Marion and Jeff, and he'd just done the first 10 minutes. And Steve and I watched it, and Steve looked out of one window and I looked out the other window, and we didn't want to catch each other's eye because we both had a tear in his eye.
Got a bit dusty in the room.
We said, yeah, we'll do that as well. We'll do that as well. So the first 2 shows we did were Marion and Jeff and Human Remains, and they both won RTS awards. And I think Human Remains won a Banff Award, which is like an international award in Canada. And it's like we got it right, and we were grown-ups. It was quite funny sitting at the RTS with Rob and Julia. It was like being their dad, and it was lovely, really, to sort of see this new generation come up and do stuff. So that gave us leeway to carry on, and because we didn't know whether we'd do more than a couple of years with the company. You're never quite sure, but. That led to other things. So I said to Julia afterwards that she should write something on her own, because unless she writes something on her own, she'll always be thought of as the girl.
Yeah.
And not be taken seriously. So she wrote Nighty Night. And it was so out there and so bonkers. We managed to get it sold, but the last episode, when we filmed it, we showed it to Steve, and Steve said that it's too dark. So we refilmed the last episode in Steve's house because we didn't have any money left. So if you watch the last episode of the first series of Nighty Night, it's actually Steve's house. And we filmed in his bedroom, his kitchen, and his living room. Basically, I think what would happen in the first version, she tortures her husband for half hour, whereas in the new version, she kills 3 different people, and it was spreading the love, basically. But we had so little money that at one stage she pushed supposed to push Mark Gatus's character down the cellar, but we couldn't afford the shot, so we said, we can't afford it. You're gonna have to kill him some other way. So she killed him with poisoned Angel Delight, which was much funnier.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Sometimes how putting confinement. I can't think of the right
constriction. Yeah,
constriction.
Right. Yeah,
can make you more creative, can't it?
Yeah, and of course pushing him down the stairs would only take a couple of seconds, whereas she dragged that, tried to stuff him with Angel Delight for a good 10 minutes.
It's so, oh yeah, Mark Gatiss is amazing. And everyone's so good in it. It's like Angus Deaton, all.
Angus Deaton, now you got to remember that Angus Deaton had just been taken off of I Got News for You at the time. So it was very contentious. But we, both Steve and I, love Angus Deaton. And we wanted to show solidarity and give him a go. And we knew he could act. And he was perfect in the role.
I mean, in hindsight as well, like it seems so silly. Like, what he got taken off the show for.
Ridiculous, ridiculous. I think there's probably more going on than we know about in terms of the politics of the issue. But he was brilliant on set and was great with everybody else and a delight to work with. So I'm really chuffed that I would hope he's proud of it. I think he added a gravitas to it, which was great. And of course, Julia is formidable in it. So you need somebody there to for her to rile against. A lot of people were saying how monstrous she was, but for me, I always sympathise with the character because she finds out in the first episode that her husband is dying of cancer, but he's been cheating on her. So she's cheated of both her husband and the legacy of that she's now got to care for a man that she knows has cheated on her. So although it's quite exaggerated the series, I always thought it had a strong foundation that somebody in that position might might go to extremes.
Yeah, I love it, and I think the soundtrack's perfect, and the location. It's just, it's such a great series. The other, well, you've worked on loads of stuff, but one of the other things I mentioned in the intro, which is a show I think is probably up there with like Only Fools and Horses for how much it's loved, is the Royal Family.
Oh yeah. Well, that was before
before Baby Cow.
So that was before Baby Cow. So in fact, that was the thing I did just before The Parole Officer. There was Mrs. Murden and Malcolm series I did with Caroline and Craig, and then immediately before that there was the Royale Family. So that was great. So I co-created the show and did the first series. But when they came to do the second series, I had the choice of doing the film. So I said I would do the film instead, which is, it led on to Baby Cow. So I think it was probably a good decision. And I couldn't be in two places at once. I'd been trying since the first Mrs. Merton show and the Coogan's Run to try and be in two places at once. I was working weekends and dinner times and night time.
Were they simultaneous then, the Mrs. Merton and Coogan?
They were both at the same time. If you look at those years, there's a lot of output in those early years, and my name's on all those shows as I was not only co-writing them, but I was script editing them as well. So I was the only one in Manchester with a computer. So I had to type it all up. I love doing it, but it was wearing me out. And then I opted for doing Baby Cow. And then, of course, 450 television programs later, I'm still wearing myself out. So I've now retired and I'm doing 70 shows a year.
Yeah, I was going to say, looking at your touring schedule, it doesn't seem like you've slowed down.
I've just transferred. It's just transferred. I've transferred my energy from one to the other. That's all.
But obviously working on Mrs. Merton and working on the Royal Family, it's like getting to work with Caroline Aherne. That must be amazing, right?
Yeah, but you see, the thing is that we all knew each other before we were on television. So we all knew each other from doing 20 minutes at a comedy club, and having no money and having no real prospects. So we all knew each other from there. So anybody I see now from those days, you're still the same person, sort of, trying to do a change of costume around the back of a door in a cupboard because they haven't got a proper dressing room. It's still, that doesn't leave you that,
Yeah.
those years. Caroline, before we did the Mrs. Merton show, was going to give it up. She couldn't earn enough money doing the gigs. So Caroline and I did a little tour together. And lucky she got, I tried to get her on a show I had called Packet of Three.
Yeah.
And I brought the people up to Manchester to see her, but they didn't get it. So she didn't end up on that. But so when she had her show, she asked me and Dave Gorman and Craig Cash to write for her. And it was brilliant because I was paid to sit in a room with very funny people.
Yeah.
What a lovely job. Somebody paying you to have a laugh. They are, we know from Dave Gorman stuff that he's done on the television and his live shows. He's an incredibly funny person.
Okay.
He was, I think, it was about 19 when he started writing for the Mrs. Merton show.
With his big sideburns.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And he used to do poetry as well.
Oh,
I
really?
met him. The first time I met him was the first time I met my wife. They were at a poetry group together. So I've got him to thank, I think, for my happy marriage. So that's quite nice. And Craig obviously did the early doors, and he's done lots of things and runs a company. So to get those four people in a room, not knowing what our careers were going to be, it was quite an adventure. And then, of course, at the same time, I was in a room with Steve, and Steve's a very funny man. With him setting off on an adventure as well. So there were exciting times, but you didn't quite know where your next sort of penguin bar was coming from.
Yeah, which seems, in hindsight, with, like you say, 450 shows under your belt, it's like that. It seems crazy that you had, all of you had times where you're like, oh, like you're saying, like Caroline was ready to quit. That just seems, what a loss that would have been to like British comedy.
Yeah, well, she was a secretary before, and I think she was going to go back and be a secretary. But you need a bit of luck. You need to be in the right place, and you need to have some people around you that can support you. And there's lots of things. I when I ran Baby Cow for 17 and a half years, there were a lot of great scripts that we had that never got made. There's a lot of great people that we were trying to work with. And the projects never got off the ground. Luck is part of the equation. But if you try hard enough, sooner or later, you get lucky. I noticed Fisk on Australian TV at the moment is doing very well. A great comedy, and somebody I worked with years ago that it wasn't making it in Britain, went back to Australia.
Oh,
and
wow.
now she's got her own show, and
yeah, like you say, if you're persistent enough, like sometimes you make your own luck in certain ways, where if you sit around waiting for something to happen, it's not gonna. But if you go out there, you're certainly upping your chances.
Might not happen in exactly the way you think, but it'll happen one way or another.
Yeah. And so the way, and I know this is wrong before I even say it, but the way I would describe you is, oh, well, he used to be like a TV producer and writer, but now he's a poet. But I know that's wrong.
I started off as a poet, you see. I started off as a poet from the age of 14, and then I got waylaid into the comedy, and then into writing, and then into producing, and so I'm sort of back doing my original passion.
Yeah.
I love. I'd do it if nobody paid me, and if nobody listened, I'd still write. So nice that they do. Otherwise, I might go a bit bonkers.
But I always say that's like a true artist is, that you would do it if no one's paying, and you do it for fun. You
Yeah.
know, that's to me is
I
what makes someone an
yeah, I
artist.
mean, the great thing about poetry, as opposed to the other stuff I've been involved with, um, poetry is a communication between you and possibly yourself, or possibly somebody else, and it's pure. Nobody alters it, nobody pulls it this way or that way. If you're making a film, you can have 400 people involved in a film, and everything gets changed. You write something down. If you remember the parole officer, the masks in the parole officer, nothing like the masks in my head when I wrote down they got insect masks on. The masks in my head when I wrote down we got insect masks on were, really grotesque mask, and they ended up as little paper
Yeah,
masks.
like
So,
I suppose, yeah, that it's like what people say about stand-up comedy, isn't it? It's a similar thing where it's just you saying it straight away
it's a
to an
pure art
audience.
form.
There's
Yeah.
yeah, there's
It's,
no
it's a,
one else involved.
no, it's a pure art form, and you can communicate things both in stand-up comedy and in poetry that are very much your concerns, and try and reach a little bit of truth, and it's unsullied by people trying to pull it towards their truth.
Yeah.
So I love doing it, and I sort of before I got the Packet of Three show, I was doing it around the country, doing shows, hour-long shows, um, and I do sort of serious poems and funny poems and long poems and short poems, and then when I was offered the chance to be on television, they asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, let's do the Muppets with me as Kermit. Nobody will know. Me as Kermit, Frank as Gonzo, and I wanted Linda Smith, but they said she wasn't big enough, in sort of performance.
Yeah.
And they said Jenny Eclair, who of course was absolutely brilliant, and she played, possibly the Miss Piggy. I'm not going to say, with that type of role. But what that meant was that, and we did 6 45-minute shows, and they went down very well. I think you got 3.4 million viewers, which is not bad
Yeah.
even nowadays. And but they wanted just the short, funny ones. So they didn't want the long, funny ones, and they didn't want the serious ones, whatever length they were. So you only saw a fraction of what I normally do. So it was a little bit constrained, as
Yeah.
we were saying earlier.
Yeah. And but you've done well, I've devoured this week the normal
Oh, the Radio
Dr.
4
Thoughts, yeah,
shows,
the
yeah,
Radio
yeah.
4, and that's like a nice mix of sort of stand-up
Well,
and
that's
poetry,
to me
isn't it?
that's the ideal, is to do those shows. They're half-hour shows now. I've done 11 of them, so that's 5.5 hours worth of material, and it's basically funny bits and serious bits intermingled in hopefully in a mix that is entertaining but has a little bit of substance to it.
Yeah.
And that's what I like to do. So that's very different from Packet of Three, and it's nearer what I set out to do originally. So I love doing
Yeah.
it. So what I do with the tours, so I'm touring with Brian Bilston, who's absolutely brilliant. Is I do an hour's worth of material on these tours. I've been touring with Nigel Plain, and I've done some solo shows. And essentially, the next show that I do, it'll be called A Normal Story. I'm working out the material for that. So whenever people come and see me, if they come and see me 6 months later or a year later, it's always new stuff, because I'm always working out the next radio show.
It's always evolving, yeah.
Yeah.
Ah,
And that's interesting for me. Otherwise, you become a tribute band to yourself, don't you?
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you can imagine why these old bands break up if they have to keep singing "Stairway to Heaven" every 5
Yeah.
minutes, or.
Do us a poem we know.
Yeah. Can you imagine you say, "This joke has been good to me, and I hope it's been good to you," and then you do your joke, and oh, thank you.
But yeah, I like I say, I'd not heard those before, and I listened to them
Yeah.
this week and just like devoured them. Really, really enjoyed them. Like you say, they're funny, but there's a lot of heart to them. You like talk about your son in them, and
Mm.
I recommended them straight away to my friend who's got an autistic son as well. I was
All
like,
right. Yeah.
you'll love this, like you'll get this, and yeah, I thought they were great.
Yeah,
It's
well, I draw upon my family life and my reality basically,
yeah,
and so I don't think anybody else could write those shows. Yeah, they're through my experience and my filter. So yeah, I'm proud of the ones I've done. Hopefully, I'm getting better. You never know. So eventually, I'll reach that pure half hour
yeah.
and then die happy. Not in the half hour, hopefully,
Yeah.
after.
I mean, it's a way of getting ratings. It's definitely a way of getting ratings.
Yeah, or selling some books, at least. Maybe a Christmas book on the back of me death.
So you mentioned the tour with Brian. Obviously, you come into Wolverhampton next week, but
Yeah, I think
people
it's
might be
Friday, I
watching.
think.
Yeah, it's Friday, but people might be watching this in the future. So I'll put
All
a
right.
link below to all your tour
Okay.
dates.
Yeah.
But what is the tour? What do you and Brian do?
Well, Brian is from Birmingham originally, and people on the internet will know him because he's got at least 500,000 followers on the internet,
Yeah.
and he's known as the Banksy of poetry because you never see his face. I don't know why. He's got a lovely face. He's a lovely young man, and we've been gigging together. We've done, I think, 9 shows so far, and they've been sell out. And he's similar to me. He's a little bit taller, a little bit more handsome, younger. I should hate him basically. He's funnier. He writes novels. He writes kids' books. He's everything I would have liked to have been. I treat him like my son. He treats me like the granddad. There's a little bit of disparity there, and we get on fine. I do all the driving, and he does the navigating, and it seems to work. On stage, sort of similar thing. Poems and jokes and stories, and people seem to laugh, and we shift some units, as they say in the poetry world. And it's mainly an older audience. I'm going to be fair with you. It'd be nice to get somebody, under 40. Come and see the show. I think occasionally you get some, and I think Brian gets a few kids because he's done some work in kids. But it's not, it's not the same audience as Taylor Swift. I can tell you that but they're seasoned audiences. Let's put that vintage audience. Discerning, I like to call them. Yeah.
And then, like you mentioned, going on tour with Nigel Planer. I mean,
Yeah.
to say like every sort of anecdote you tell feels like you're name dropping, but that is just your life.
Well, funnily enough, I once met Gorbachev, and he said to me, he said, "Never name drop." That's a very old joke. I'm going to resurrect it for you. Funnily enough, I did. I did once. This is my 2 biggest claims to fame. I once stood next to Gorbachev. He had 2 minders, so you don't speak to him, right?
Yeah.
But we was on the Clive Anderson show, and I'd written the jokes for Steve for Tony Farino. I used to write the jokes for Tony Farino, and Gorbachev came off, and Steve was the next guest on. So Gorbachev came and stood next to me, and he pretended not to speak English, but I could see him laughing at my jokes. So, he's a wily old bird. I didn't tell him, but my old mate Phil Jones once came into school and didn't do his homework because he thought it was going to be World War III. I thought, if I strike up a conversation, I'll mention that, but I didn't.
Ah,
My other claim to fame is my wife wrote a film called Snowcake, and it had Sigourney Weaver in it.
oh wow.
So I was a producer on the show, executive producer on the show, and it opened the Berlin Film Festival. So I went over to Berlin, and the Alan Rickman's in the film, Carrie Ann Moss from Matrix,
Yeah.
and I'm there, and we're all dressed up in finery, sort of tuxedos and stuff. And I've never seen them in real life before. I've seen them in films. There's those little boxes of matches that they have that flip open, and they have the name of the place on it. So it's got Berlin Film Festival, and Sigourney smokes cigars, so she put a cigar in her mouth, and I lit it, and it's like being in the movies. It's like being in Casablanca or something.
If I ever had the opportunity, I'd be like, and it wouldn't strike. And
no, you got to do it perfectly. No, it was because I'm a lad from a council estate in Nottingham, so to be there with world film stars in Berlin was it was like a dream.
It's funny to me that you have like two you're like, these are my two big celebrity moments.
Yeah, well, I did. Funnily enough, I did actually once stand next to Julia Roberts, but I couldn't speak. So it was a Notting Hill. Right, see, the parole officer was made by the same people who made Notting Hill, right?
Oh, okay.
So Steve and I got invited to the premiere of Notting Hill, and I'm stood there in front of Julia Roberts, right? And of course, the film is about a film star that falls in love with an ordinary person. I thought, if I talk to her, do you know what I mean? It'd be cliche, wouldn't it? It'd be like, there you go. I didn't want to do that to her again.
We'll put her through that.
But you see, they're proper celebrities, aren't they? Let's face it. Julia Roberts, Gorbachev. They're not like me and Steve and Frank Skinner and John Thompson. We're just lads from council estates.
I said it at the beginning, but like, thank you for all the television you're responsible for. It really.
I've been enjoying it.
Yeah, I'm glad you've enjoyed it as well. So you're on tour with Nigel playing. I assume that's a similar thing to Brian.
Yeah, that's in the autumn when I'm on tour with him, and it's a similar thing. Actually, what we do with Nigel is because he had a novel out as well, a time travel novel, and we split it into 4 bits. So I'd go on for half an hour, then he'd come on for half an hour, then I'd go on for half an hour, and he'd come on for half an hour, and then at the end we'd actually do a bit together where we answer questions from the audience, and the questions from the audience was always brilliant. It was lovely. We got some funny reactions. He'd do a bit of Neil on stage, because obviously he's known for Neil. He'd do a poem as though he was Neil, and it did make me laugh. He got a text after the show saying, "Oh, it was brilliant you doing that poem as Neil. It was almost like he was in the audience." I don't quite know how that works, but there you go.
But it's because you must have loved the young ones and stuff.
I love the young ones, and it'd been nice when I've been going in the car with Nigel. He's been, because he's writing his autobiography at the moment. He's been telling me about various things in his life, and he's led. I mean, the young ones, if you think about it, was quite a short period of all their lives. Involved. There were 2 series, so no more than 2 years of their life, and he's been in. I mean, even at the time, he had more viewers for Shine on Harvey Moon.
Oh yeah,
than the young ones. But not many people sort of think about Shine on Harvey Moon, which was a great show. And he's been in so many musicals and written so much and put plays on and everything. That he's got a vast array. And it's quite weird thinking that of him just as Neil, because
Yeah.
he's done even without Neil, he's done a huge amount.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, like some people only think of Steve as Alan Partridge,
Partridge, yeah,
but
yeah,
at least there is a lot of Alan Partridge. It's not just like two 6-episode series, is it? There's at least, not to think, because Steve's so much more than Partridge, but
yeah.
at least there is a lot of it. For him to
I think
become Partridge
Partridge
and you,
exists in every medium now. I think if they
yeah,
invent a new medium, it'll exist in that as well. He's done books and films and podcasts and video casts and everything. And he's really, made a very rounded character. And of course, the great thing about doing all these different things is, if you're not careful, after a bit, you're competing with yourself.
yeah,
So any artist, you do Guernica or something, if you're Picasso, and then they're going, oh well, this is not as good as Guernica, is it? You've got this awful thing that you could,
yeah,
and I think with Steve has got that, and with Partridge, people go, oh, it was so funny, and he's been very clever to do it in different ways. So he'll do it on the internet, then he'll do a film, then he'll do a book, so that you're never directly competing against yourself.
yeah, yeah. It's not just one long running series of like him either hosting the show or living in the travel lodge or whatever.
Yeah.
It's always something different. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it like that, but that's
Oh well,
yeah,
Steve has. He's ahead of the game with that.
yeah,
They often say who's the brains behind Steve. It's Steve. Steve's the brain behind. That's how clever he is. He's been the
yeah.
brains behind himself.
I'm sure you were happy to tell people it was you though for a while. You're like, oh
Well,
yeah, it's me.
I think people thought I was one of Steve's characters. I think there's a bit of me in Saxondale. If you ever see the
Oh yeah.
Saxondale program, because he's got a Nottingham accent, so I think he does a bit of me in that. Yeah.
So where can we send people if they want to know more about you? Obviously, I'll put some links below, but where's the best people to
Well,
send?
I'm on all the things like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Threads. There's lots of others that I'm not on, but I'm on those. So I post. I find Facebook. I know it's for older people, but I find it the best because there's no restrictions. You can put as long as you like, and you can
Yeah.
put as many photos as you like. And what I find is you get more of a community feel back. People all write stuff back, and I'll be able to write to them. So it's non-threatening as well. You
Yeah.
don't people jumping down your throat if you're trying something new. So definitely Facebook. I know it's got its problems, but it's as social interaction goes, it's the best online, I think.
Excellent. Thank you ever so much for talking to me, Henry. I really appreciate it.
Well, I enjoyed it because the thing is, we could talk for another few hours, couldn't we? But
Oh God. I genuinely, like I say, there's so much I want to just go. And what about this? And what happened with this? And how much did that cost?
And I love nattering about all that stuff, but you've got to do it in small doses. Have me back on in a year, all right?
Yes,
and we'll do new stuff. We'll talk about write down the other shows that you like, and we'll do them.
You have to balance yourself, Mark.